Next, from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library in Springfield, we hear a presentation by Rob Kennedy, the co-president of C-SPAN, who discusses the new book published by his organization, which ranks the American presidents on several categories. We hear how historians rank the presidents on their administrative abilities, their ability to work with other nations, and their communication skills, among other key categories. After sharing some of the insights in the book from historians, Mr. Kennedy, who grew up in Springfield, Illinois, and attended the University of Chicago, holds a sit-down conversation with Illinois State Historian Sam Wheeler as they discuss some of the best and worst American presidents. This runs about 50 minutes.
American President's Life Portraits. It is phenomenal. It teaches all about all of our presidents, and it's just wonderfully done, and we're greatly appreciative to our friends at C-SPAN for making it available to us. It will be in the atrium through September 18th, so hopefully you'll get a chance to see it tonight. If not, please come back and bring your family and friends. And we were so pleased today to have the C-SPAN bus here. I don't know if any of you got to walk through it. It's so fun. I was in there a long time. A lot of my staff went down and wondered where my staff was. They were in the bus. But we had a great time there. What a great way to teach about how government works in a really fun way all around the nation. Now tonight we're going to hear about my very favorite topic, the American presidency. C-SPAN and Public Affairs created the wonderful book, The Presidents, Noted Historians Rank America's Best and Worst Chief Executives. It's a really fascinating compilation with contributions from 43 presidential historians and biographers, including several who have been right here over the years, including, for example, our former director, Richard Norton Smith, who is a great presidential scholar, Doug Brinkley, who spoke for us just a few weeks ago here. I think many of you were at that presentation. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who's a great friend of this institution, a wonderful author. Ron White, who I hope you read his works. He's been here often as well. And my good friend who spoke here last year, Jeff Engel of SMU, is represented in the book as well. They're really the best in the business. So with that, let's get our program started. I've been a long-time fan of C-SPAN. I'm sure that doesn't shock you all. I once worked with Senator Howard Baker Jr. in Tennessee, and he was very active in arguing for the televising of congressional proceedings, thinking it was a key part of civic education, civic engagement, and C-SPAN has been that tool of education and engagement since 1979. Broadcasting not only those proceedings, but a range of other great programming, all dedicated to educate, to engage, to inspire, to encourage people to participate in their communities. We're really proud to have Rob Kennedy here tonight, a native of Springfield, Illinois, who in 2012 was named co-CEO of C-SPAN. Rob has had a long history with C-SPAN and is a leader in the cable industry. He received the prestigious Vanguard Award for Programmers in 2004 and is a member of the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. Now, in addition to his roots here in Springfield, he has other Illinois ties. He's a graduate of the University of Illinois and of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Now, later, joining Rob on the stage will be Dr. Samuel Wheeler. I know a lot of you know Sam. He's a member of our leadership team here at the ALPLM. He serves not only as our Director of Research and Collections, but as the State Historian of Illinois. We're proud to have him on our team and thankful he could join us here tonight. Now, after the program, please join us downstairs to tour the exhibit, and we have coffee and refreshments thanks to C-SPAN. The President's book will also be for sale if you didn't get a copy earlier or if you're inspired to buy more. And Rob, I believe, has consented to sign some of those books afterwards at the table downstairs in our lobby, so please do that. So with that, thank you again for being here. Enjoy tonight, and I turn the program over now to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much. It's great to be back in Springfield. It is my hometown. I still think of myself as coming from here. Thank you all for being here tonight. I have a lot of family and friends here tonight, including friends from growing up on State Street when we were like 6 and 7 years old. My best friend from high school is hiding here somewhere. My mom's here, my sister's here, my cousin's here, my sister-in-law's here. I've got to be totally perfect tonight because you all know everything about me. No exaggeration. No audience, I think, has ever known me as well. But Springfield is very important in my history. It's also one of the most historic cities in the nation. It's also very important in C-SPAN's histories. We've had a fantastic relationship with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum over the years. We've had many events here. Alan and his team have hosted us. We had the bus out front. So I just wanted to say right up front in my talk, thank you very much to you and all of your staff tonight. So 40 years, 1979. It was a big year. 40 years ago, just last month, my wife Cynthia and I celebrated our 40th anniversary. Well, we were married 40 years ago. We just celebrated our anniversary. And I had this nice slide made up for us. She is not buying it. She's not buying it. But that is true. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary. And so did C-SPAN. C-SPAN was founded in March of 1979. And what precipitated that was that the House of Representatives decided to allow camera coverage in their chamber for the first time in March of 1979. Cable television was brand new. We had it in Springfield, but we only had about 12 channels. And it was the satellite that had launched that gave rise to a number of cable channels and the growth in the industry. And the founders of the industry back in 1979 said, we should take that feed of the House of Representatives and make it available to the nation. We'll do this as a public service, and we'll do it in an unfiltered way where we show the entire proceedings of the House. And over the years, we added congressional committees. We added the United States Senate in 1986, and Senator Baker was a big part of that effort. And we've been doing that ever since, all funded by the cable industry as a public service. There is no government money in C-SPAN. Entirely funded by private companies, no advertising, no ratings, so we can deliver events from Washington as if you were in the room in an unfiltered way. So we were trying to figure out how to celebrate our 40th anniversary. Not ours, Cynthia, but C-SPAN's. We're still trying to figure that out, I guess. Or I am, I guess. Okay, no more ad-libs. Got it. How should we mark the 40th anniversary with some way to show some of the resources that we've created at C-SPAN and made available both to the public and to students? And we hit upon the idea of a book. Now, we had published 9 books before the book, The Presidents. All of our books are based on interviews that occurred on C-SPAN. We take those interviews, we take the transcripts, we can compose chapters around them and then connect them around a theme. Our 9th book was about the First Ladies. So it seemed like the 10th book logically should be about the presidents. But our aha moment came when we decided to marry chapters about the presidents with our surveys of presidential leadership, our surveys of historians ranking the presidents on various attributes of presidential leadership. The result is the presidents. So there's 2 parts to the presidents. One are the interviews. Each chapter is taken from a book, a biography, about a particular president, and here are the authors. Many of them are familiar. Alan actually mentioned Douglas Brinkley right up front, Richard Norton Smith. We looked in our archives, chose a biography connected with each president, and then took the transcript and turned it into a chapter that dealt in one way or another with that president's biography. The Illinois presidents are the presidents we're going to spend some time on tonight. Here are the 3 books that are featured of our 4 Illinois presidents. We have Ronald White on Ulysses Grant, Lou Cannon on President Reagan, David Garrow on Barack Obama, and Harold Holzer on Abraham Lincoln. Who here has read a book by Harold Holzer? Yeah, there are 53 of them. Or 54? Sam and I were talking about this, 53 or 54. Now, I mentioned that Springfield's important in C-SPAN's history, and one of Harold's books is a big part of that. In 1994, he published the texts of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. That was published at a time when there was a lot of discussion in Washington about should the way Congress or presidential candidates debate, should it change? There's a lot of dissatisfaction. This is the time when Newt Gingrich was rising in the House of Representatives in the early part of the Clinton administration. Harold published these texts, and while this debate was going on, a lot of people said, I wish we'd debate like Lincoln and Douglas did. They knew how to debate. Well, what people didn't always know was that these debates were long. They were 3 hours long. One person spoke for an hour. The next person, the other candidate, spoke for an hour and a half, and then the first candidate got what was called a rejoinder, which was 30 minutes. These texts were long, but we thought, wouldn't it be great to illustrate Lincoln-Douglas debates in a real way? So we went to the 7 towns in Illinois where the debates were staged, and we went to the mayors of those cities. And if you press me in the Q&A, I'll name them. Of course, now that I said that, I'll probably forget one. Sam's here to help. We went to the mayors and said, if you would stage these debates using the text that Harold had published, we will send C-SPAN camera crews there to cover them. All 7 communities said yes. They staged the debates. We covered them. We kicked it off with a reenactment of Lincoln's House Divided speech right here in the old state capitol. It was one of the most successful historical productions we've ever done. I loved bringing my East Coast colleagues to Springfield, and they were all like, wow, it's flat in Illinois. I said, yeah, it's flat. I mean, seriously, I said, well, you know, we got corn, we got soybeans, you know, what more could you want? Taught them all about horseshoe sandwiches. But what that showed us at that time, which was 25 years ago, was how history can provide context for today's events. And that's why we've invested in these interviews with historians and our surveys of presidential leadership. So what about these surveys? How are the presidents ranked? First thing, it's not people at C-SPAN who rank them. We send surveys to noted historians, many of whom are on the previous slide, and ask them to rank the presidents on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being highest, on each of 10 categories of leadership. Then we average those results, we add them up. That's how we get the rankings we're going to talk about tonight. We've done the survey 3 times, in 2000, 2009, and 2017. Here are the 10 leadership qualities. I'll read them. We'll come back to them at various parts of the presentation. Public persuasion, crisis leadership, economic management, moral authority, international relations, administrative skills, relations with Congress, vision or setting an agenda, pursued equal justice for all, and performance within the context of times. That last category is an attempt to capture that the presidency has been changing over the course of American history, and this category was added to attempt to capture that. I should also say we did not come up with these 10 leadership categories. We had an advisory group of historians who've worked with us on all 3 of these surveys, and you know them all, Douglas Brinkley, Richard Norton Smith, and Edna Green Medford. They have worked with us on all of our surveys. But importantly, in all 3 of these surveys, the categories have remained the same, which means we can really look at trends over time of how historians are assessing the presidents. Now, I mentioned we did the survey 3 times. The last time was 2017, and that was when President Obama's administration came to an end. We think that's a fair time to take a snapshot. So we did President Obama, 2017, George W. Bush, 2009, President Clinton in 2000. So I'm going to say right up front, President Trump is not included in the survey results. But there are 3 chapters in the book, penned by Richard, Edna, and Doug, assessing President Trump's presidency early in the presidency and comparing him on some of the qualities, leadership qualities that we saw earlier. So, of those who have been in the survey, who's up and who's down? between 2000 and 2017. Woodrow Wilson, down from 6 to 11. And one of the categories that he has fallen in significantly is pursued equal justice for all. He's gone from 20th to 35th. Andrew Jackson has also been down from 13th to 18th. Now, he always ranked low in pursued equal justice for all. He's 38th of 43 presidents. But many of his other categories have moved down in the time period from 2000 to 2017. Grover Cleveland, from 17 to 23rd, again marked down for pursued equal justice for all. I don't know if we have any Grover Cleveland fans here, but his highest rank is in, I should ask you, Sam, but I won't do that yet, public persuasion. He was ranked 20th in public persuasion. And finally, Rutherford B. Hayes, also marked down a little bit in pursued equal justice for all, but in fairness, a lot of the presidents in the high 20s to the low 30s, there's not a big separation in their scores. So Rutherford B. Hayes, just general decline in categories. Who's up? Eisenhower has moved from 9th to 5th into the top 5. This was one of the big takeaways from our 2017 survey. It seems as if there's a nostalgia or an appreciation, perhaps, for Ike's quiet leadership style. Bill Clinton, from 21st to 15th. And we're going to talk about Bill Clinton in a moment in more detail because we're going to talk about the recent president. So we'll talk about what moved him. And finally, one of our Illinois presidents, Ulysses Grant, has moved from 33rd to 22nd. Top 5. I could not come to this town if that wasn't true. More than that, he has been number 1 in all 3 of our surveys with very strong scores. His lowest rank is 4th in relations with Congress. That's how strong President Lincoln's numbers are. Number 2, probably could have guessed this group, George Washington. He scores very well in moral authority. And also, interestingly, he's number 1 in economic management. Setting up the country, I guess, Alexander Hamilton's plan. I'm getting into your territory, so I'm going to stop. But those are his 2 number 1s. 3rd, FDR. Number 1 in public persuasion. 3rd overall. 4th, his relative, number 2 in public persuasion, Teddy Roosevelt. And 5th, as I mentioned, President Eisenhower. His highest rank is 4th in crisis leadership. The bottom 5. We're not going to go through these one by one. Well, interestingly, Richard Norton Smith has an interesting comment about these 5 presidents. William Henry Harrison was president for a month. William Henry Harrison was number 38. So Richard calls these net negative presidents. They were all below William Henry Harrison. John Tyler, Warren Harding at 40th, Franklin Pierce, 41, Andrew Johnson, 42, James Buchanan, 43. Our historian for the James Buchanan chapter is Robert Strauss, and his book about James Buchanan has a very simple title. Worst, period, president, period, ever, period. Now, I have to have a little fun with this because my colleague and co-CEO Susan Swain, who is responsible for editing the chapters in these books, which is just a tremendous feat, but she's from Pennsylvania. So her one president is 43rd in Illinois. The modern presidents. Ronald Reagan, 9th overall. He has moved up in each survey. Started at 11, went to 10, now 9. George H.W. Bush, 20th. He's stayed around 20. It'll be interesting to see with his recent passing if that changes historians' assessments in any way because of all the news coverage of the first Bush administration. Bill Clinton, number 15, but as I said, he's entered the survey at 21. His ranking in relations with Congress has moved up 20 points. He was impeached, second president impeached. In the first survey, he was in the high 30s, I think 38th in relations with Congress. He's now in the teens. So a reassessment of President Clinton. George W. Bush, 33rd. He entered the survey at 36th. But an interesting thing about President George W. Bush is that his rank moved up in public persuasion, as if we sort of longed for W's style of communicating. And finally, President Obama, he entered at a very strong number 12. He has tremendous rankings in Pursuit Equal Justice for All, Moral Authority, very high rankings. His lowest ranking, similar to President Clinton, was Relations with Congress. So it'd be interesting to see if his rankings change as well. All right, we have 4 presidents from Illinois. Well, not technically from, but they're our presidents. They spent time here. You know, only one of them was born here. You all know who that was, right? This is a good group. Yeah, President Reagan. All right, President Lincoln, I mentioned. He was number 1 in 4 of the 10 categories. His lowest rank, number 4 in relations with Congress. Ronald Reagan, 9th overall, 5th in public persuasion, lowest in administrative skills, number 33. And that really hasn't moved. He's been in the high 30s. President Obama, 3rd in Pursuit Equal Justice for All, and as I mentioned, number 39 in relations with Congress. And Ulysses Grant, only 1 year in Illinois, Sam, but it was an important year, short time. 10th in Pursuit Equal Justice, and 37th in administrative skills. Now, as you can tell at C-SPAN, we're kind of history nerds. Rachel Katz is here. Rachel did all the fact-checking for this book. She did all sorts of editorial assistance. She knows more about presidential trivia than probably anyone, partly because she worked on a website with a lot more information related to this book. You can go in and for every president, you can find the original interview that serves as the chapter in our book. There's a lot of biographical information about the president and links to their historical sites. And the video interviews with the authors. And you can be a history nerd at C-SPAN, but you can also be a numbers nerd. And then you can go into the survey results. Now, I don't know if we have any students here, but there's one. We got 2. This is good term paper material, I think. I think you can really get into these numbers and look at how they compare and contrast over time. So finally, I'd just like to say before I close and ask Sam to come up, we have an exhibit downstairs, and it's going to be open after our talk tonight, of portraits of the presidents on these 8-foot panels that contain not only original oil paintings painted for us by an artist based in North Carolina named Chaz Fagan. He's also a sculptor, and he did the sculpture at Reagan National Airport of Ronald Reagan as you drive into National Airport. So he's a well-known sculptor and artist. Those are the focal points of the portraits exhibit, but there's also lots of biographical information, photos and images from the president's time, where we have audio recordings, where we have video. You can use your smartphone to access those from the portrait exhibit. So thank you all very much. There are some copies of the book, I think, available for sale if my mom didn't buy them all. She's known to do that. So with that, I'm going to invite Sam Wheeler to come up, and we're going to have a discussion about this. And at the end of our discussion, or with about 15 or 20 minutes before the hour, we're going to look for your questions. So please be thinking of your questions. We'll have mics, I think, on either side of the room.
I love the creation of lists and ranking the greatest bands of all time, the greatest baseball players of all time. and ranking the presidents. It's a great way to start a conversation, to delve into the backgrounds of these individuals. I'm really happy to be up here to have a conversation with you, Rob, with C-SPAN, but I'm also really interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, let's talk about Lincoln first then.
Yeah.
In Harold's book, and the Harold Holzer book that we featured is called Lincoln President-Elect,
Yeah.
and it documents his journey from Springfield to Washington as he won the Republican nomination and then the presidential election. But I learned in reading that book that he only carried Springfield by 65 votes.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what his political relationship was with the city of Springfield.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to sort of talk about all these Illinois presidents, I think. Illinois is such a compelling place. We produced 4 presidents on your list, at least. We played a major role in their development, right, on their road towards the presidency, including a person like Ulysses S. Grant. Spent a short time here in Illinois, yet so significant. I would argue, had he not moved here to Illinois, you might not know who Ulysses S. Grant is. So what is it about Illinois? I'll also say, when I was looking at your list, I'm a numbers nerd too. I was doing some statistics. And for states that produced multiple presidents, Illinois got the best ranking. Our presidents they average 11th. That's awesome,
Yes.
right? That is fantastic. So, what is it about Illinois then? I think gets to the crux of the question. What is it about Illinois that makes Illinois such an essential place, such a unique place in America that is able to produce such effective leaders on the national level? Illinois, it's always been this microcosm state. It's always been this state that is able to reflect the nation at large. It was true for Ulysses S. Grant. I think in many ways it's true today. If you look at demographics and if you look at economic factors, etc., Illinois ranks really well. During Lincoln's lifetime, Springfield and Illinois is a deeply divided place. Doesn't that reflect the nation at large? In his own hometown, Abraham Lincoln barely squeaks by. I think because it's such a great reflection of the nation at large. Political fervor is at a fevered pitch. There are 2 major candidates in the North that are articulating these opposing viewpoints that the nation has at large, and how appropriate that those 2 major candidates come from Central Illinois, where that political drama is really playing out on the national level.
Well, let's talk then about Ronald Reagan and his roots here, because we talked about roots in Illinois having the great number of high-ranking presidents, and he spent his entire youth here. We think of him as a creature of California or Hollywood, but 20 years here. What was the influences here you think that you can see in his presidency?
So I bet a lot of people in this room, you remember our exhibit on the 4 presidents from Illinois as we celebrated our bicentennial. That was such a, first off, I think the exhibit turned out really well. I'm really proud of our team here, all the work that we put into that. It was something that I think we'll always look back on as a highlight for the bicentennial of Illinois history. And for me, I'm a 19th century guy. It was interesting getting to research Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, for instance, and I went up north with Director Lowe, and we got to see the Reagan birthplace and where he spent a large majority of his young life, of formative years. We got to meet people who knew him. That was really unique. We got to see his high school yearbook. And I loved getting to read, by the way, about his time as a lifeguard and all the ladies that he seemed to rescue from drowning. That was awesome, right? He's very popular, even as a young guy. But I think there's something, and we tried to make this point in our exhibit, coming from small town America, having those roots, grounded in the Midwest, sort of growing up, understanding what America is, what America's all about, the American dream, getting to rise all the way to the White House sometimes, but it's pretty cool to be able to rise to Hollywood, and that was certainly his experience. So it was really interesting to be able to see what effect Illinois had on a person like Ronald Reagan, who's now in the top 10 in American presidency in terms of rankings.
So you're a 19th century guy.
Yeah, that's right.
Talk to us about U.S. Grant and what you think might be responsible for that move in the rankings.
Oh, great. So Ulysses S. Grant is to me, so interesting. To me, what's interesting about history is really what comes through in this survey is that history, our interpretations of the past, change over time, right? The events don't necessarily change, right? We know the date that certain events happened, but the way we look back at those events and we interpret them, it does change over time. So in that sense, history is always changing, at least the way we interpret it. The life, the presidency, the legacy of Ulysses S. Grant is an awesome example of that. When he died, individuals thought, you know, they ranked him up there with Lincoln and with George Washington. They thought that's how we're going to remember Grant. At the turn of the 19th century, as we get into the 20th century, there's almost as many books in print about Grant as Lincoln. That's amazing to think about, right? A lot has changed since then. And so what has changed? His reputation really eroded as those lost cause proponents began to write. The cult of Lee began to grow. They demonized Grant the Butcher. When they talked about his presidency, they accentuated those scandals and implicated that somehow he was a corrupt individual. World War I was a traumatic event for the world, but particularly for American historians. They emerged from that event, from that carnage, really with an anti-war sentiment. A lot of stories came out about war profiteering, etc., and American historians became very anti-war. That influenced the way they looked back at the past and looked at the Civil War and looked at an individual like Ulysses S. Grant, who, again, gets tagged with this Grant the Butcher sort of a moniker. It's not until World War II where Grant's image begins to become resuscitated a little bit. I was interested in that huge gain that he's made since 2000. And it's not that we dismiss the scandals. We know about the scandals in the Grant administration, but I think you can say a few things about Grant today. It's not that he's a corrupt individual. He's surrounded by individuals that did not always have his best intentions in mind, nor the best intentions of the country at mind. What Grant's guilty of is having a poor judge of character and keeping those individuals surrounding him a bit of being too naive to allow those individuals to have access. But what we celebrate about Grant, I think, is commendable. As president, he wasn't always successful in this, but he fought to make emancipation meaningful. He fought to improve the lives of the freedmen. He supported the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. He does battle with Andrew Johnson, excuse me, for all the right reasons. He attacks the Ku Klux Klan, supports legislation that's effective in tamping that down. He creates the Justice Department during Reconstruction. Those we see as very commendable things. Wasn't always successful in his efforts, but we certainly celebrate those efforts that Grant is moving towards. The other part of this is, and this is where historians in the crowd, I give you a pat on the back. Part of Grant's success is that the historians working in the fields of Ulysses S. Grant have done a pretty darn good job in the last 50 years. I studied under John Y. Simon at Carbondale, the editor of the Ulysses S. Grant papers, published more than 30 volumes of Grant's writings. Today, now we know that caricature, Grant the Butcher, maybe a guy who drank too much, right? There's more to that individual than those things. The clarity of his writing is amazing. John Marszalek and the papers of Ulysses S. Grant now, they worked with Harvard University Press. In the last couple of years, they published a brand new version of his memoirs that is brilliant. It's his original text, but yet they footnoted it so meticulously back to his papers, his sources. And you know, recent individuals like Ron Chernow and Ron White have just done an amazing job in maybe helping us understand Grant's presidency and where Grant came from in a different light, and that's reflected in those rankings for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
With respect to President Obama, early in the survey, I'm interested in how you compared and contrasted him in the exhibit here with the other 3 Illinois presidents, and do you want to make any predictions?
Oh my gosh. So I don't want to make a whole lot of predictions. I said I'm a 19th century guy, and so let me tell you why that is. It's too hard. It's too hard for historians. We're too close to a presidency like President Obama. Certainly we're in the midst of the presidency of Donald Trump to adequately assess how it turned out. You can be incredibly unpopular at a moment in time. You can pass legislation that perhaps is incredibly unpopular, and you can get beat over the head by the supposed mistakes that you made. Go into our whispering gallery in the museum. Those are contemporary critiques of Abraham Lincoln's presidency, and we know how that turned out. Since 1948 in all these polls, he's right there at the top of the list. We need a certain amount of time to go by before we can adequately, I think, assess a presidency. In our exhibit with President Obama, I think we were able to bring a lot of his Illinois roots to life. One of my favorite pieces that we had in that exhibit was the offer letter that he got from the Sidley Austin law firm for an internship. That's where he met his wife. What a beautiful piece to be able to talk about the important role that Illinois played in Barack Obama's life, and that was sort of the approach. It was less about assessing his presidency necessarily, although we did have the notes that he had used as he prepared his Selma speech, for instance. So in that case, that was interesting to see his working process as president unfold.
Great.
Yeah.
We're about ready to go to your questions, so I think we'll have mics on either side of the room. I'm going to have one more question for you at this point, Sam. If you were asked to write a presidential biography and you could choose any president, who would you choose and why?
Well, it can't be, Abraham Lincoln, right? Because the Lincoln biography is the one I'm adequately prepared to write.
Okay, well then, all right. I wondered if you'd go there.
Tell me I got to write one on Benjamin Harrison, I'm in trouble, probably.
Well, then I have a follow-up,
Okay.
which is there are hundreds of Lincoln books.
Yeah.
What parts of his presidency or legacy do you think would benefit from more scholarship, more publishing, and maybe that would be the theme of your book?
Oh, okay. Now I'm ready. Here in Illinois, in our museum, in our archive, one of the things that I'm so proud of, that I love to work on, we know about Lincoln's legacy. He saved the Union. He ended American slavery. That's why we remember that individual today. He's celebrated. He should be celebrated. We carve him in marble. We carved his face on the side of a mountain. God love it, right? Well deserving all those things. But here in Springfield, we have a special relationship with him. He was a human being. He was our neighbor. He was a father. He was a husband. And lately I find myself interested in that aspect of him. And I think by humanizing him, by not being afraid to point out when maybe he didn't do a Marvel-esque thing, he maybe, God forbid, he made a mistake, I think that's really useful. And the lesson in that is we can all aspire, we can all try, despite all the faults that each of us have that we're acutely aware of, we can achieve greatness, much like an Abraham Lincoln. And so highlighting those aspects that make him human, that's kind of what I've been drawn towards lately, interested.
Very good. Do we have any questions in the audience? I'll let the microphone folks
We got some
come,
microphones,
folks.
they're in the back.
Yeah.
There were two areas I wondered why they weren't included in the survey. One was relationships with other countries and world leaders, and the other is relationships to and appointments to the Supreme Court.
So I think maybe there was a foreign diplomacy.
There is international relations is one of the categories, so is an attempt to capture that.
Supreme Court, is there a category that would relate to that somehow?
There is not in a specific way pursued equal justice for all, perhaps vision, setting an agenda. So it's more indirect, and not all presidents got Supreme Court nominations.
That's right. Would possibly some of those decisions factor into that curious category, I thought, administrative skill? Would that possibly be in there?
It definitely could as well. And since you ask about international relations, the #1 ranking in international relations went to FDR. No,
FDR had a lot of years, though. I don't think it's fair.
we have...
I couldn't help but notice your highly ranked presidents seem to have dealt with the most significant crises when they were presidents. Could you speak to that correlation?
So I want to speak to that, yeah. The thing that jumped out to me, Abraham Lincoln ranks #1, right off the bat, says C-SPAN's got it right on this, right? But did you notice the bottom two rankings? Yes. You got Buchanan and you've got Andrew Johnson. Those are the guys that bookend Abraham Lincoln. Buchanan is dead last because he handed Abraham Lincoln the biggest mess that any president has handed a successor. Abraham Lincoln is able to navigate the crisis of civil war. Literally, if he failed, there wouldn't be a country to talk about. He's able to navigate that crisis. His successor comes in, admittedly, because of assassination. He's not expecting to come in, but he's second to last because he's not able to pick up where Lincoln left off. He's not able to deliver us through that process of winning the peace. I think that speaks to Abraham Lincoln's skill very well. But you're right, those presidents that rank highly on this list, there's crisis that they're dealing with. And I bet you all of those presidents would have told you that they would have rather been president during a very quiet time in American history.
I guess my question is, I'm a little, I mean, it's nice, obviously coming from Springfield, that Lincoln is #1, but I guess I'm surprised that George Washington is at #1, just as the founder of the country, having to literally set the precedent for everything that we do as the presidency. And I'm kind of curious, like, how the numbers came out on the differences between Lincoln and Washington, making Washington #2, literally because he, had to create everything from scratch, so to speak.
And George Washington does get high rankings, and he actually gets the highest ranking in performance within the context of Times, which is interesting. But he has one ranking outside of the top 10, and it's in Pursued Equal Justice for All. And all of the Virginia founder presidents have relatively low rankings in Pursued Equal Justice for All because they were slave owners, and that affects their overall rating in the ranking. So, for example, we didn't talk about Thomas Jefferson, but he's 7th. And James Madison is 17th. So that one category, which is, we talked a little bit earlier on the slides, there's a lot of reassessment going on in that category of how presidents performed as pursuing equal justice for all. And that's really what affects Washington. And that's because of the way we do the survey with the 10 categories.
Well, would not Washington, he was one of the founding fathers. It was more of a group effort than just a single person, I believe. And they chose him because he'd been the general and won the war. And he was, I think, from what I've read, a good administrator, and he didn't want to be president, and he was certainly glad to go back to his home at Mount Vernon. Would you agree with that?
I'm going to give you...
I think very highly of George Washington. When you go into our museum, when you go into the Lying in State section, you look up on the wall and you see the words Washington the Father, Lincoln the Savior. It's from Springfield in 1865 at Lincoln's funeral. In all those surveys where Lincoln is not number one, Washington is the guy who's number one. They're kind of a 1 and 2 deal. Sometimes FDR is going to sneak up in there, but if you're going to be outranked by somebody in the American presidency, George Washington's a good one to lose to. You got to tip your cap at the end of the day. But I do agree, not being able to solve that issue of American slavery, founding a nation based on that principle that all men are created equal, yet having a nation where people own other people is quite the contradiction that it's hard for us in 2019 to overlook that one.
Rick.
One of the categories that I saw, that I thought was missing potentially, was intelligence. And one of the pieces of presidential trivia I picked up about 20 years ago is of the 43 presidents that you're talking about, 2 of them were members of Phi Beta Kappa. Do you have any clue as to who those 2 are?
I don't know who those 2 are, but I'll throw this one out there for you. Sometimes the smartest guys in the world don't make very good presidents or administrators. There's more to that puzzle out there. Jimmy Carter was a brilliant individual, but he's not in the top 5 in terms of effective presidents. You have that category. Is something preparedness or something, being prepared for the presidency?
No, not
Okay.
really.
I've seen some assessments of the American presidency where they assess sort of how equipped is an individual to come in to be president. And if we were going to rank them that way, Abraham Lincoln would not rank very well if we would look at it that way.
We do have the category administrative skills, which speaks, I think, a little bit to management ability. And one of the interesting findings in administrative skills is that there is one of the bottom 10 presidents who scores 14th in administrative skills. He's highly regarded as an administrator, but not as a president. And that's Herbert Hoover.
That's interesting.
It's very interesting.
So you mentioned a couple of times how historians are reevaluating the way that presidents and world leaders have pursued equal justice for all. I was wondering if you could, and also with the changes in the rankings over time, that was a category that was mentioned frequently. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the way that historians are reevaluating evaluating that category and what they're looking for.
Oh, that's a good point. So, this pursued equal justice for all, what are they looking for? We've talked a lot about race tonight, but I don't think it should be confined to race, certainly. In terms of the women's rights movement throughout history, how receptive were some of these individuals to that? I think that factors in there. I think as we get further along into the 20th and 21st century, we're talking about economic factors and issues like that. You probably have some pretty good feedback from historians on different categories that they're looking at in that regard.
Well, there's pursuit equal justice for all is the category that has the widest diversity of ratings for any president. It's the category where there are clearly a wide group of opinions. Now, one thing that's important is we don't tell the historians what the categories mean. So of the 116 historians who completed the survey, they simply have these same categories on a list, and they do the ranking according to their interpretation of these categories. But just to give some examples on pursuit equal justice for all, number 1, Abraham Lincoln. Second, LBJ. But LBJ scores 38th in international relations, so there's a division on LBJ. Third is President Obama, and fourth is Harry Truman, and fifth, and this is a bottom half president, is Jimmy Carter. So that just shows that this particular category has a wide diversity of opinion.
Thank you very much. Great program, and I love the book. Quick question, if I'm interested in learning more as each of the presidents on these categories, is that in the book or is it on a website or something like that?
All of the above. The website has the numerical rankings. The book has the complete survey results as well. And at the beginning of each president's chapter, we quickly summarize their ranking and how they've moved over the years. So the book gets you there, and the website gets you there.
Rob and Sam, we're going to have one more question. I'm going to use the director's prerogative to ask that question. So, I'm sorry. Every now and then there's a perk to this job. I'm going to use it. So, of the categories of how you've evaluated presidents, personally, to each of you, which of those categories is most important to make a good president?
Good question.
Which ones? I know you only can pick one and only one.
Well, I work at C-SPAN, so I can't have opinions.
Oh, I see. Very good. And believe me, I know Sam Rilla can have opinions because I hear them every day. So let's go, Sam.
Man,
what do you think?
I got a lot of them.
They're across the top.
Okay. I'm reviewing my options.
Please, yes, Sam.
Well, Director Lowe, I think they're all important, but...
Yes, very nice qualification, Sam.
I mean, you can't go wrong with crisis leadership, right? I mean, that's a pretty good one, but here's my choice. I like public persuasion.
Yeah.
Public persuasion is critical. You can have the greatest product in the world. You can have the greatest idea in the world, and if you can't sell it, it's not going anywhere. And I think that is absolutely critical to elect a leader that has a good set of values, that understands where he wants to, or she, take the country, and to be able to articulate that and to get you to jump on that train is very, very important, and elect the right person so you're heading in the right direction.
So Sam, I want to say, good news is you're correct because I agree with you on that one. So that's very good. So very good. So very good. With that, thank you all for being here. Please join us downstairs to see the exhibit and have coffee and refreshments and buy some of the books. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Rob and Sam.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rob. That was fun.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching the Illinois Channel. You may also wish to follow us online, where you are free to make comments or program suggestions. Get our breaking news updates on Twitter, where you can find us at Illinois Channel. You can find our past programming on YouTube at youtube.com/Illinois Channel TV. Or you can go to the Illinois Channel website at illinoischannel.org. There you can find not only our current video stories and programs, but also our library of past programs, as well as articles that provide additional information about Illinois issues and individuals. The Illinois Channel, keeping you connected to your state, your issues, your home.